The University of Cape Town law professor Richard Calland has withdrawn as a member of the Section 89 panel that was formed to investigate President Cyril Ramaphosa's Phala farm saga. Calland came under scrutiny by political parties who claimed that he is biased when it comes to the president. The UCT professor refuted these and says he will step down because he doesn't want to draw unnecessary attention over his appointment. He joins now to elaborate further on this. Professor, thank you so much for giving us your time this afternoon. What did you make of the objections by the opposition parties to your inclusion in this panel?
Well, I thought they were unfortunate. I think they drew or attracted controversy to my appointment in an unhelpful way. My attitude was that the process is bigger than the person. Obviously, they would disagree with that and say, well, you need a panel that can be trusted. However, neither of the parties that objected, the EFF and the DA, presented any, in my view, reasonable evidence for what's called an apprehension of bias in the public eye. They made references to old articles in which I'd offered broad analytical support to President Ramaphosa, but in fact made no reference, because there's no reference to be made, to any article or anything I've said that's indicative of bias on the particular issue of Phala. In fact, the one article I wrote on Phala on the 31st of August indicated my concern that the President had chosen not to answer questions about Phala in Parliament, and he's accountable to Parliament, so he should have answered those questions in my view. Anyway, nonetheless, the point about this process is that it should have the trust of the public. It's a very important process. It's a landmark process. It's the first time that a president has been there's been an attempt to impeach the president. And this first stage of that process, where an independent panel must conduct a preliminary inquiry, is an important first step. That process will now continue with somebody else, and that process, as I said, is much bigger than me.
Now, Prof, the DA has put on record that their objection in principle to your inclusion is not based on your credentials or your track record, but simply on the fact that someone who has made political pronouncements, whether for or against the president in public, is someone who will compromise the integrity of the process. What's your take on that?
Well, it raises an interesting debate about whether somebody who is a political commentator and analyst, as I am, can play this kind of role. And perhaps the answer to that question is no. But the real question is whether any individual, when given that kind of public responsibility, has the ability to perform the task with a free and fair and open mind, independent of any vested interest or otherwise. And my answer to that question was that I could, otherwise I would not have accepted the nomination of the Good Party. I think it's unfortunate, as one of the leaders of another political party said to me in private, we all have opinions, we all have, anyone who works in or around politics has a view on life. The only difference for a political commentator is that they make those opinions known publicly, because that's the role we play.
Now that you are free to speak on the matter as a political commentator, do you believe that the president did himself an injustice by not bringing the country into his confidence when asked about the Phala farm?
Well, I think the answer to that must be yes, because in the absence of any clear explanation from him, it's inevitable that rumours will circulate. It's inevitable that his opponents inside the ANC and outside the ANC will try and use that silence to dent confidence in his integrity, to try and dent his credibility. Clearly, his strategy or his legal view is that he should at this stage say as little as possible. Perhaps his political intention is simply to get to December to secure a second term as ANC president, and then will take care of this matter. That shows that he's putting the ANC before the Constitution, because his responsibility is to account to Parliament. As I said on the 31st of August, his failure that day to answer questions in Parliament, put to him by members of Parliament, was a serious aggregation of his responsibilities in terms of the Constitution.
Lastly, Prof, will the political parties that opposed, such as the DA and the EFF, do you think they would accept any other outcome other than that calls for the impeachment of the president?
That's a very good question. I suspect not. Clearly, in Ramaphosa's case, Phala is the one opportunity that has now presented itself to opposition parties to try and grab hold of, to try and dent, as I say, his credibility and try and wound him. So, therefore, they will make everything they can out of this to try and persuade the public that this is a president who should not be trusted, who is as corrupt as anybody else. And this is the one thing they've got to go on. So they will, I think, seek to undermine that process as best they can to achieve that partisan political objective.
Prof, the DA has also called on an ad hoc committee that could possibly, not only as the Section 89 would look at the president's involvement, but all other entities that were involved and possibly involved in the Phala saga. Do you believe that this could take us any step closer in finding the truth?
I don't know. My instant reaction to that suggestion when it came out the other day was that it was premature, because at the moment we simply don't know enough about what happened. We've got allegations made by Arthur Fraser. He's hardly an impartial person. He has real skin in the game. He's clearly part of a group that's very viciously opposed to the president and his reform efforts. So I don't think it can be easily trusted. But as I said before, in the absence of a clear and satisfactory explanation from the president himself, or indeed from any investigative authority, we're left with a kind of lacuna. There's an information gap here. I think we have to pause, we have to wait, let the impeachment process unfold. And then, if there are questions to be asked of other agencies that were involved or should have been involved, then Parliament can step in and do what it needs to do at that point.
Well, the President did answer some questions in the last week. What was your take on some of the responses he gave with regards to this issue?
Well, I still don't think it amounts to full explanation. I think he's trying to sort of manage this as best he can. The fact that he was willing to move the dial a little bit further suggests that he is listening, that he's perhaps attentive to the idea that this is beginning to hurt him, that his failure to account, his failure to provide an explanation is in fact a risky approach.
All right, Professor Calland, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for joining us. That was UCT Law Professor Calland speaking to us on his withdrawal from the Section 89 panel, that is meant to look into the president's involvement in the Phala farm.